What does Rolex, Monopoly and this pencil have in common? Welcome back to HoroLogical. At first glance, a pencil and a wristwatch, they don't look like weapons of war. Yet during the Second World War, Britain fought not only with tanks and Spitfires, it fought with imagination and ingenuity. Some of the most remarkable victories were not won in the battlefield, but on the factory floor by craftsmen who used precision and trust as their ammunition. This is the story of MI9, the secret branch of British intelligence that turned ordinary objects into instruments of escape, where a pencil could hide a map, a board game could hide currency, and a watch could carry hope through barbed wire fences. A story that connects Cumberland Pencils in Keswick and Rolex in Geneva, two companies separated by miles, united in the belief that craftsmanship could keep people alive. In 1939, the War Office created MI9, charged with helping Allied airmen and prisoners of war escape and hopefully evade capture. Its chief architect, Christopher Clayton Hutton, was part showman, part engineer. Before the war, he'd worked in advertising, dabbled in journalism, and even consulted magicians on misdirection and sleight of hand. He knew how to make secrets disappear, and more importantly, how to make them reappear exactly when needed. Hutton's idea was revolutionary: harness the ingenuity of British industry, recruit tailors, toy makers and instrument firms, anyone with the skill to hide precision inside the mundane. A secret supply chain of hope, stretching from London, the Lake District and beyond. Engineers built a hollow wooden barrel, capped with a ferrule that could be pulled off to reveal a miniature compass and a hidden map inside. The pencil barrel was meticulously drilled out. Many broken pencils were produced during this process until they actually perfected the technique. Inside waited a tightly rolled silk map. It unfurled silently, it was waterproof, and it was impossible to tear. Some variants even contained a flexible saw wire running straight through the core. Each pencil looked utterly ordinary, that was its camouflage. And perhaps the most poignant reminder of that work still survives. The factory time clock used by Derwent's workers to punch in and punch out each day. It stood silent witness as, after official hours, a handful of trusted men stayed behind under the glare of a single lamp. Bound by the Official Secrets Act, they worked in secrecy, crafting escape pencils that could mean the difference literally between capture and freedom. Every off-the-book shift stamped into that clock marked not just the men making prisoners of war escape equipment, but it was a quiet act of defiance, a moment when time itself became a weapon for good. They were quite literally doing overtime for freedom. These escape pencils were slipped into survival kits and Red Cross parcels bound for prisoner of war camps, a simple object infused with ingenuity and hope. MI9's success depended on Britain's craft industries, those already fluent in microns and tolerances. Watch component makers fabricated the miniature compasses the size of shirt buttons. Some of those little compasses found their way into this version of the Derwent escape pencil. Optical firms ground tiny lenses for escape periscopes. Instrument makers built concealed sundials and survival kits for downed pilots. Even tailors stitched silk maps into uniform linings with invisible threads, completely undetectable. While MI9 engineered concealed escape equipment in Britain, another act of quiet resistance was unfolding in neutral Switzerland. Hans Wilsdorf, founder of Rolex, had been born in Germany, but he made his fortune and his loyalties in Britain. When news reached Geneva that British officers in German camps in the Western Front had lost their watches when initially captured, a deal was brokered. Thanks to Switzerland's neutrality and Red Cross communication channels, Rolex watches could be shipped legally to prisoner of war camps. Wilsdorf made a remarkable offer. Any British officer held as a prisoner of war on the Western Front may order a Rolex watch and pay for it after the war if he survives. Rolex supplied watches to prisoners of war on credit. Confident that the war would end with an Allied victory, prisoners could request a watch from Switzerland through the International Red Cross, and Rolex would honour that order with the bill to be paid after the war. This was all made possible due to Switzerland's neutrality and was a significant morale booster for the prisoners of war. No contracts, no deposit, only trust. Thousands took him up on it. The most famous was Flight Lieutenant Clive James Nutting, imprisoned at Stalag Luft 3, later immortalised in The Great Escape. His Rolex Oyster chronograph timed the guards' patrols and the tunnellers' shifts beneath the sand. After liberation, Nutting wrote to settle his account. Wilsdorf personally thanked him and refused to charge interest. These watches are amongst the most collectible Rolex watches in existence. For many British officers, that Rolex became more than a timekeeper, it became a promise. Each tick echoed a quiet vow: when I get home, I'll pay for this. To men stripped of control, their dignity, that promise meant everything. It re-anchored them to a world of honour, civility, and normal life waiting beyond the barbed wire. The watch was a contract with survival, an unspoken pact between a craftsman in Geneva and a captive somewhere in Europe. Every glance at the dial whispered, "You will make it home." MI9's creativity, it reached every corner of British manufacturing. John Waddington Limited, the makers of Monopoly, they printed hidden silk maps beneath the games board, and they actually slipped real currency under the chance cards. Toy companies moulded miniature vehicles with secret compartments. Bookmakers built hollow heels for gold sovereigns and compasses. Fountain pen makers had radio parts inside the barrels. Even the humble razor blade was re-engineered, one side sharpened for the perfect shave, and the other side magnetised to act as a compass needle. Behind every invention was a factory workshop operating in secrecy. MI9's activities directly inspired the James Bond universe's Q department. The one thing the prisoners had on their side was time. Time to look through those boxes of pencils and find the one or two in a box that could contain hundreds, a large box of pencils, and they could find the one or two pencils that contained the hollowed out one with the map and that little mini compass. The men knew it was there, the message got to them it was there, but somebody had to actually sit and go through those boxes and find it. Same with the Monopoly games, there could be piles of these games to be distributed out to the men. There was maybe only one or two sets of the real currency, but the men had time in their hands to go through every single object with a fine-tooth comb. This was something the German guards couldn't do. They couldn't devote the time to going through every single parcel delivered, checking if there was anything nefarious in it. So time played to the British prisoners' advantage in this case as well. In captivity, time was both tormentor and companion. Days dragged, yet timing was everything. Guard rotations, food drops, the instant a tunnel might break through. Others coveted the watches just to hear the tick, a heartbeat, reminding them they were still alive. Time measured patience, not just seconds. For those with a Rolex on their wrist and a map inside a pencil, it measured hope. There is an ethic that runs through all true craftsmanship. The idea that precision should serve purpose. During the war, that purpose was freedom. A pencil could carry a map and a miniature compass. A game could conceal real currency. A watch could restore hope. Hans Wilsdorf and the engineers of MI9, they never met, yet they worked towards the same goals. They had faith in human fortitude expressed through ingenious design and trust. Their creations remind us that mastery of the small, a spring, a compass, a blank of wood, can alter the course of history. After 1945, MI9's operations were classified and then quietly forgotten. Factories returned to making standard pencils, fun but ordinary toys, and charging up front for watches, as was the practice of the day. Yet their wartime efforts left a lasting mark on both industry and identity. Today, the Derwent hidden map pencil stands as a tribute to the people in that Lake District town that once helped escaped prisoners find their way home. And Rolex, still synonymous with precision, carries a memory of Wilsdorf's wartime gesture, an act of trust unimaginable in today's modern world. The craftsmen of Britain built the tools that could help a man escape. They engineered the means to slip past walls and borders unnoticed. But Hans Wilsdorf, he gave something deeper. He gave them hope. He understood profoundly that a watch on the wrist could do more than measure seconds, minutes and hours. It could instill a sense of honour and desire, not just to survive, but to resist, escape, evade, and hope for a better future. Watches became aspirational objects. Every Rolex that ticked inside a prison camp was a reminder that someone somewhere still cared. It was a belief that could not be broken or silenced. British manufacturers gave escaped prisoners ingenious ways to navigate and survive, but Wilsdorf gave them the will to break out and survive. They had to pay for that watch after all. Altogether, they proved that the greatest function of time is not to mark our limits, but to remind us what we're capable of in the darkest of times. When we look at a watch or sharpen a pencil, we rarely think of war or captivity, but during those darkest years, these small objects carried enormous weight. They measured more than minutes, they measured hope, and they gifted freedom. They proved that trust could survive even in confinement, and that ingenuity could bloom in the bleakest of places. A pencil helped men find their way home. A watch helped them believe they'd get there. Together they show that the finest tools humans have ever crafted were not for destruction but for freedom. And remember, collecting watches isn't logical, but it is horological.